Hello, and thank you for joining me this afternoon. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Andrew Shunk, and I'm an Advanced Practice Coordinator with Washington Regional Transplant Community. My objective is to have you leave here today feeling empowered that we're going to tackle the organ donor management timeline. What is the need for organ donation? Organ donation is the only treatment for end-stage organ failure. A single organ donor can save the lives of up to 8 different recipients through the donation of the heart, lungs, liver, kidneys, pancreas, and intestines. There's no major religion that opposes organ donation. Over 113,000 people are on the national waiting list, and lastly, 20 people die each day waiting for a life-saving organ transplant. Key definitions discussed in the presentation include brain death, the irreversible cessation of all brainstem function necessary to sustain life. OPO, an organ procurement organization. Allocation, the matching of donor organs to recipients off the national waiting list. Serology testing, testing of communicable diseases including HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C. And HLA testing, human leukocyte antigen testing, which tests for antigens to determine transplant compatibility. The organization I work for is Washington Regional Transplant Community, better known as WRTC. We are one of 57 federally designated organ procurement organizations. We are staffed by 35 clinical practitioners with varying backgrounds, including physicians, nurses, respiratory therapists, and social workers. Our donor service area covers the District of Columbia, Northern Virginia, and 3 counties in Maryland. Total, we have 45 donor hospitals and 5.2 million residents. As WRTC works to improve organ function and optimization in order to increase the number of organs transplanted, the donor management timeline is continually being extended. When we extend our donor management timeline, we put greater strain on our OPO, donor hospitals, and donor families. Our OPO staff is required to provide 24/7 on-site coverage during organ donor cases, and by extending donor management timelines by even a few hours, there's a felt strain, especially during busy times when there could be more than one simultaneous organ donor case. Since our coordinators are now spending much of their time on their primary role of donor management, there's a neglect of secondary roles, include chart reviews, educational in-services, and staff meetings. Due to the greater strain placed on our staff, we've also experienced high turnover rates of 40% each year for the last 3 years. Our donor hospitals notice the strain as well. Hospitals are continuing to see record numbers of admitted critical patients, leading to higher patient acuities and census. The greater numbers mean nurses are often paired with difficult, sometimes unsafe assignments. Additionally, due to the stability and sickness of the organ donor, we ask for a one-to-one nursing pairing during their donor management timeline. We're also requesting procedures be performed by the physicians while they're seeing larger number of sick patients in their ICU. Lastly, we're putting greater strain on our donor families. To explain to a family that the process could take anywhere from 48 to 72 hours before the operating room requires us to often extend their grief or their ability to have some closure, even knowing the patient is dead. There are delays in funeral arrangements, including transportation of the patient, not to mention if the medical examiner is involved in the case, which is an additional 24 to 48 hours before the donor can be released to the funeral home. On some occasions, the families harbor negative feelings towards organ donation, even though it meant their loved ones saved the lives of so many. Who needs to hear this? Of course, WRTC, including our CEO, CFO, medical directors, clinical leadership team, and the frontline recovery staff. Everyone is involved in directing the process at WRTC. Our donor hospitals need to be involved, including the CMOs, hospital administration, our donation champions, composed of physicians and nurses, and the support staff. Lastly, our transplant centers, who are accepting organs on behalf of their recipients. Every single person included in the 3 categories has a direct part in the process and can make it work better. Let's review the donor management timeline prior to January 2018, where we made some changes that we'll talk about later. We start the timeline from once an organ donor is declared brain dead and end once the donor enters the operating room. The timeline is the time the organ donor is in the intensive care unit under the medical management and care of WRTC. Unlike medical television shows would have you to believe, an organ donor is not declared brain dead and then immediately whisked away to the OR. A patient is declared brain dead, and if they're registered, we start our process. If they're not, then we speak with the family. All organ donors have serology panels run for recipient safety and HLA testing performed to determine chances of organ rejection. The serology panel is sent to a qualified lab in Pennsylvania, which can take up to 7 hours of travel and an additional 7 hours to result. Meanwhile, WRTC starts invasive monitoring, donor stabilization, lab studies, and medical therapies to determine organ donation. Included in this are bronchoscopies to recruit lungs and echocardiograms to determine heart function. Once we have all preliminary testing resulted and we know what organs are suitable for transplant, we start the allocation process. We offer every organ to every transplant center down the list of recipients that are matched, beginning with the sequence number 1 and continuing down the list until we locate a recipient or the list is exhausted. Offers are sent electronically and screened by transplant centers. Transplant centers can then determine if they need additional testing, including CT imaging, ultrasounds, or on most occasions, where the donor is over the age of 40, a cardiac catheterization. Most of the time, these procedures cannot be scheduled overnight and have to wait until the next morning. This adds additional time. Even though organ procurement is an emergent life-saving surgery, most hospitals will not bump scheduled elective surgeries to make room for an organ donor case. Oftentimes, we will have to wait until their schedule clears up in the evening. Then, we coordinate for all of our teams to arrive and enter the OR. We tell families 48 to 72 hours because there are also uncontrolled variables, including recipient complications, OR availability, and the timing of testing. And here's the time added to the timeline. Let's use some data for reinforcement. In 2016, we had an average of 70 hours on donor management, including 5 hours waiting for invasive line placement, 12 hours for a bronchoscopy, and 12 hours for an echocardiogram. In 2017, we had a decrease to an average of 68 hours on donor management, however still saw 5 hours of wait time for invasive line placements, 13 hours for bronchoscopies, and 12 hours for echocardiograms. Our final strategic objective is by the December 31st, 2021, Washington Regional Transplant Community will reduce the brain-dead organ donor management timeline to an average of 60 hours by improving the timeliness of procedures utilizing advanced practice coordinators. To break it down, by December 31st, 2020, WRTC will internally perform 85% of all invasive line placements on brain-dead organ donor cases and within 3 hours of the start of the donor management timeline. By December 31st, 2020, WRTC will internally perform 85% of all bronchoscopies on brain-dead organ donor cases and within 5 hours of the start of the donor management timeline. And by December 31st, 2021, WRTC will internally perform 65% of all echocardiograms on brain-dead organ donor cases and within 8 hours of the start of the donor management timeline. What current practices do we have in place to support our strategic objective? We currently have an advanced practice coordinator role as of June 2017. Currently, 1 of 2 are employed. We are shifting from hospital to OPO performed procedures. We've reduced procedure wait times, including performing 80% of bronchoscopies and invasive line placements, and we improved our relationship with hospital partners. We've updated the donor management timeline as of January 2018. We received input from transplant centers and created criteria for pre-allocation testing. We've reduced the time between allocation and the operating room. Let's revisit the donor management timeline post-January 2018. The timeline has stayed the same with the exception of moving CT imaging, cardiac catheterization, and abdominal ultrasounds if the donor meets the criteria. We've now decreased the time between allocation of organs to coordination of transplant and recovery times from 12 to 28 hours to 10 to 20 hours. The data from 2018 and 2019 directly reflects some of the changes already made between the shift of testing, pre-allocation, and the hiring of an APC. In 2018, we had an average of 68 hours on donor management, including 4 hours waiting for invasive line placement, 6 hours for bronchoscopy, 12 hours for an echocardiogram. And in 2019, we had to decrease to an average of 62 hours on donor management, including 3 hours waiting for invasive line placement, 4 hours for bronchoscopy, and 12 hours for an echocardiogram. The best way to compare how we're doing as an OPO is to compare ourselves against other OPOs in their donor management timeline. Again, WRTC has seen a decrease in our times, but we still sit at or above the median. OPO 3 has the shortest times, also currently employs 3 full-time APCs who are able to perform echocardiograms, which brings us to implementing future practices to continue to improve. Again, breaking down our trend in donor management, as the years progress, we continue to decrease our time, but our strategic goal is to put the average time below 60 hours. You can see part of the decrease is because we have updated our donor management timeline. We can also trend our procedure wait time to show improvement. Our invasive Lyme time has dropped to 3 hours in 2019, and our bronchoscopy time waiting has been cut in more than half from 2017 to 2018. Again, this is due to the hiring of a single advanced practice coordinator to perform procedures. The BRTC will also implement future practices, including hiring an additional advanced practice coordinator tentative for May 2020 to provide 24/7 coverage for procedures. We'll continue to decrease our wait times for procedures and improve staff morale. We'll also send both APCs to echocardiogram training tentative for October 2020. We'll contract with a cardiology consult group who will be able to read the echoes real time, which will cut our wait times for echocardiograms by 50%. Let's talk about measuring success. Our OPO EMR system records our time marks as well as whether procedures are performed by the OPO or by the hospital. This data can easily be extracted and trended to ensure we are meeting our targets. Outside of data, we need to show improved OPO partner satisfaction. We need to show that we've reduced the strain placed on donor hospitals and donor families. We also need to show improved staff retention. The career field of organ donation requires passionate individuals who are willing to compromise holidays, family time, and personal time to save the lives of so many people. We should be able to expand their skill set and make their work more rewarding. In closing, Washington Regional Transplant Community will reduce our donor management timeline. However, we will not reduce the number of organs available for transplant. We need to continue to improve our practices because we're not only representing the organ donor, but the 113,000 people currently waiting for a transplant, and the 20 people who die every day without a life-saving transplant. Thank you.